LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 10th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me and Cheech the cat here. We'll be using the 10 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, although no NBC News Meet the Press. It was Sunday, but it wasn't Meet the Press on Sunday. French Open tennis, I guess. But other than that, I'll be using clips from those sources to create a fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. And as you can see from the title of my video, the main topic of the Sunday shows was this Israeli hostage rescue in Gaza that reportedly killed hundreds of Palestinians, many of whom were civilians, and that was covered extensively on the Sunday shows. And so that's what I'm going to cover with my media criticism and political commentary show on Monday after the Sunday shows. And as part of that, I kind of want to start with political comedy. I mean, it's not a really comedic topic, but the way that Fox News covers it is kind of ridiculous, and I guess that's comedic in a way. And their big thing today on the shows on the Fox News channel, the cable network, was to go after the media for the so-called blowback against Israel because the media asked questions about the hundreds of civilian casualties. And so Fox News made that the main topic. Here you can see the chyron from Outnumbered today. Israel facing blowback over raid to save hostages. And Harris Faulkner, the host of Outnumbered, or one of the hosts of Outnumbered, did a teaser for the story like this.
Reaction to Israel's dramatic rescue of 4 hostages and how the media have been quick to go after not Hamas, the savage killers, the torturers, the rapists, but the sovereign nation of Israel that Hamas invaded and broke a ceasefire on October 7th. Stay close.
So with that setup, you'd think they'd have some good evidence of the media from the Sunday shows engaging in this supposed blowback, going after the sovereign state of Israel instead of the killers. And but if you watch Kayleigh McEnany's introduction to that topic, I don't know if they used the wrong clip, or I mean, I do a lot of videos where you like make an argument and then you back it up with a clip. And here you see Harvard-trained lawyer Kayleigh McEnany totally failing at the making the argument and backing it up with the clip over here.
Indeed, a joyous day. Noah reunited with her mom. You remember her on the back of that motorcycle. And her mom is terminally ill. She has stage 4 breast cancer. Unfortunately, Almog, who was released, his father died hours before his release. But joyous, no less, to have 4 hostages freed. Our national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, however, was asked specifically by Dana Bash if they okayed the operation, the degree of American involvement. Here's what he had to say.
The Palestinian people are going through sheer hell in this conflict because Hamas is operating in a way that puts them in the crossfire, that holds hostages right in the heart of crowded civilian areas.
So the part before that is important. The part before that, Dana Bash specifically says, is the U.S. comfortable with the way Israel carried out the mission? And rather than just knee-jerk reaction saying yes, it was kind of a roundabout answer.
Well,
Actually, that was an incredibly pro-Israel answer from Jake Sullivan in that clip. I mean, he basically blamed any civilian casualties on Hamas for using human shields, which is kind of the Republican talking point. And I don't know what Kayleigh McEnany's talking about. There's the part before that I didn't show where it was really bad. Well, I'm going to show you like the question that Jake Tapper was asked, and the question before that Jake Tapper was asked, all about my main topic, the hundreds of reported casualties from the 4 Israeli hostages that were rescued over the weekend. Here's, before I get to the news summaries, I'm going to bring that newsmaker clip forward and show you the whole interchange. And I don't see anything wrong with Dana Bash's questions or Jake Tapper's answers, and really I have no idea what Kayleigh McEnany and Fox News was complaining about, but you can let me know what you think after we watch the full clip from CNN State of the Union together over here.
Jake, I want to ask you a little bit more about that mission. And one of the questions is what we're hearing from Gaza. Two different hospitals in Gaza say at least 236 people were killed as a part of the Israeli operation to rescue hostages. What is your understanding of how many Palestinian civilians, not militants, but civilians, were killed in that rescue mission?
We, the United States, are not in a position today to make a definitive statement about that. The Israeli Defense Forces have put out one number. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry has put out another number. But we do know this, Dana. Innocent people were tragically killed in this operation. The exact number we don't know, but innocent people were killed, and that is heartbreaking. That is tragic. The president himself has said in recent days that the Palestinian people are going through sheer hell in this conflict because Hamas is operating in a way that puts them in the crossfire, that holds hostages right in the heart of crowded civilian areas, that puts military emplacements right in the heart of crowded civilian areas. But every day that we see more innocent people lost is another horrible, awful, tragic day. And you know, our hearts in the United States and across the world break for that. But there is only one answer to stop that from happening going forward, and that is a ceasefire and hostage deal that ends the military operations, brings the hostages home, and puts us in a position to give the Palestinians an opportunity for a better future for their people.
And last, just about the mission, you don't want to specifically say how the U.S. was involved, which I understand, but just broadly, big picture, no one can deny the amazing news of seeing these innocent civilians who were finally brought back to their families from Gaza after being held there for 8 months. But is the U.S. comfortable with the way that the Israelis carried out the mission?
Look, Dana, why is President Biden going out publicly and calling for a ceasefire and hostage deal? It's because he thinks the best way to get all of the hostages home is in a deal where they're brought out diplomatically, where there's no need for military operations to get every last hostage out. So that would obviously be the best solution to this. In the absence of that, without Hamas saying yes to the deal, unfortunately, we are going to continue to see ongoing conflict and military operations in which Israel makes efforts to recover its citizens and, frankly, to recover American citizens. What we would much prefer to see is a ceasefire where the hostages come out peacefully. That is available. Israel has said yes to it. Now Hamas needs to say yes to it. That's where President Biden's full effort, energy, and attention is. And you heard yesterday from the French president here in Paris that France stands behind that, the world stands behind that, and Hamas should come to the table and say yes.
Well, you mentioned that you are in Paris. I have to, before I let you go, ask about the trip that you and, of course, the president is making to Europe.
And then Dana Bash goes on to follow up asking about aid to Ukraine and other issues that came up on the European trip. But I don't see what it is. What's the media blowback against Israel? Just asking the most basic questions there from CNN and Dana Bash. I don't know if there's anywhere else in that interview that there's anything objectionable. I certainly didn't see it, but in case you want to check for yourself, I'll put the entire CNN State of the Union transcript from yesterday over in the live chat. If you can find anything that is worth the criticism from Fox News, it's just not there. But I'm now going to move on to the news summaries. There are 4 news summaries this week since there's no NBC News Meet the Press. The longest and I think the most detailed, best coverage of this whole topic was on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, with the permanent co-host or whatever. I can't remember Martha Raddatz's title, but Martha Raddatz is the host, and they have their reporter James Longman giving almost a 6-minute summary of what's going on with all of this, and I will talk about that a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. This morning, 4 Israeli hostages are back in the arms of their loved ones after a dramatic but deadly rescue mission by the Israeli Defense Forces in central Gaza. Among the rescued, Noah Argamani. The 26-year-old had become one of the symbols, the human faces of Hamas brutality. Noah was seized on October 7th from the Nova Music Festival, terrorized, thrown on the back of a motorcycle, and taken into Gaza. And this was Noah on Saturday, reuniting with her family for the first time in 8 months. Israelis cheering the news of the largest rescue of hostages since the terrorist attack in October. But the rescue left a devastating toll for Palestinians, with more than 270 killed in the mission, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. It comes amid ongoing negotiations for the release of all the remaining 116 hostages, including 8 American Israelis, as part of a larger ceasefire in this deadly war. ABC News foreign correspondent James Longman has spent months in Israel since October 7th, covering the war and the hostage families, and gives us the dramatic details of the rescue and the reunions.
Israel is celebrating this morning. 4 hostages rescued. The agonizing wait for their families over. But the cost of their freedom enormous. Hamas says more than 270 Palestinians were killed in the operation, nearly 700 injured. Among the 4 rescued, 26-year-old Noah Argamani, the young woman kidnapped on the back of a bike. The fear on her face was gut-wrenching. She was driven away by Hamas militants as she reached out to her boyfriend, Avinatan Or. He too dragged away, his fate unknown. Now, nearly 8 months to the day, Argamani is free, seen here reuniting with her dad and her family. The emotion overwhelming. She told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a phone call, "It's been so long since I heard Hebrew." Also freed, 27-year-old Russian-Israeli Andrei Koslov, who was working as a security guard at the Supernova Music Festival. 41-year-old Shlomi Ziv, a husband of 17 years. And 22-year-old Almog Merjan, who just finished serving in the Israeli military and was set to start a new job when he too was kidnapped.
I'm happy that you are here.
I spoke with his mother, Orit, and uncle Aviram, just weeks after he was taken hostage. She said Almog called her as the attack unfolded.
There are rockets and shooting all over. I'm hiding. I don't know what's going on. I'll call you every half an hour. Mom, I love you.
This was the last phone call.
The last phone call.
She didn't hear from him or know if he was alive until this video began circulating. It shows Almog held captive, frightened, at times covering his face. That fear now gone. Almog now safely back in Israel, Orit holding him close. But his father not getting that chance. Israeli media reporting that tragically he died just hours before Almog's rescue.
Thank you for bringing my son to me. I'm so excited that I could hug him today.
Israeli Defense Forces say intelligence targeted 2 locations in central Gaza weeks ago, where they believe the hostages, codenamed Diamonds, were being held. The 3 males kept in one apartment, Argamani a little more than 200 meters away in another. Israeli Special Forces had mock-ups of the building, practicing the raid. At 11 a.m. on Saturday, in broad daylight for the element of surprise, the launch was a go. At 11:25, the soldiers were on the move. With the rescue underway, airstrikes pummeled the city. The 2 locations penetrated simultaneously, facing gunfire in one, an Israeli killed in the raid, but saying all 4 hostages, each loaded into helicopters, free after 8 months of hell.
This was a high-risk, complex mission based on precise intelligence.
But the human toll of the rescue is now raising serious questions. The mangled bodies of men, women and children covered on the ground outside the Al-Aqsa hospital, the injured crowding its halls. One woman saying 2 of her cousins were killed, 2 others seriously injured. They didn't commit any sin, she says. They were sitting at home. Israeli officials say Hamas purposefully shields themselves within the civilian population, but the United States has repeatedly called on Israel to do more to protect ordinary Palestinians. Hamas says 37,000 have now been killed since October, but Hamas is still holding 116 hostages taken on October 7th, a third of whom are believed dead. Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed Saturday to bring them all home.
We're committed to getting the release of all the hostages, and we expect Hamas to release them all. But if they don't, we'll do whatever it takes to get them all back home.
Martha, this was one of the single bloodiest Israeli assaults since this war began. And as talk of negotiations continue, the fundamental problem remains. Benjamin Netanyahu says he wants to bring all the hostages home, but at the same time says the war will not end until Hamas is destroyed. And he's facing immense political turmoil. There's widespread public anger about how he's managed this war. His war cabinet is in danger of falling apart, and that will mean sustained pressure from the Israeli extreme right. Martha?
Our thanks to James for that report. I'm joined now by Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson and retired Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner.
And I will have some good questioning by Martha Raddatz of that IDF spokesperson, especially about what James Longman in that clip there called one of the deadliest raids, the deadliest Israeli actions in this entire conflict. Hundreds, almost 300 people killed, according to the hospitals and the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas. Israel says that it's less than 100. And then that doesn't even count the wounded, which I saw an estimate of like 700, so almost 1,000 casualties to get the 4 hostages. In wartime, it's very difficult to get accurate facts. What do they say? That truth is the first casualty of war, isn't that? Didn't somebody say that? And so just based on the reporting, you have to ask yourself the question, how many casualties are acceptable, especially civilian casualties, in order to rescue 4 hostages? I mean, if that happened in the United States, if there was a hostage situation and a whole bunch of civilians were killed to get them out, that would be a big scandal. And I mean, almost 300 people to save 4 people. I mean, the way to get around it, if you're a Republican, is to blame the victims there and say that or blame Hamas because they're using human shields and they started the conflict, and you see that on Fox News all the time. But that doesn't do a lot of good for the hundreds of people who were killed in the strike, and especially the tactics used. You'll see Martha Raddatz, after I get through the news summary, she asks the IDF spokesperson about these airstrikes in broad daylight when people are walking down the street. It's not like the middle of the night, and so there are going to be fewer casualties from things falling out of the sky into the streets when the streets are more deserted. And anyway, I'll get to that after I get to the next 3 news summaries. The next one is Fox News Sunday, which is only loosely able to be called news. You'll see both Martha Raddatz do her little intro, and at least to Fox News's credit, they do report on the civilian deaths, and Trey Yingst reports on it as the second reporter, after Peter Doocy does his best to spin Biden's trip to Europe in the most negative way for Biden possible. Even like, he spoke too softly, we couldn't hear what he was saying, or there's a whole bunch of Fox News bias in the Fox News Sunday news summary with Shannon Bream. Did I say Martha McCallum earlier? Shannon Bream is the host, not Martha McCallum, if I said that by mistake. And then Peter Doocy and Trey Yingst over in this clip.
Hello from Fox News in New York. In the headlines today, celebrations in Israel this weekend as 4 Israelis are rescued in the largest hostage rescue operation since the latest war with Hamas began. The 4 reunited with family after 246 days in captivity. Hamas says 274 Palestinians were killed during the raid. And the pier built by the U.S. military in Gaza is back up and taking in food and humanitarian aid for Palestinians after it was blown apart in high winds and heavy seas last month. Voters across Europe are set to decide the direction of the European Union's parliament today. Early polls suggest they could shift the world's largest trading bloc to the right amid concerns over the war in Ukraine and migration. Those issues sure to be a top priority as G7 leaders prepare to meet in Italy this week, including President Biden. In a moment, we'll get reaction from Republican Senator Tom Cotton. But first, we've got team coverage from Trey Yingst in Israel and where we begin with White House correspondent Peter Doocy in Paris. Hello, Peter.
Shannon, good afternoon. President Biden spent part of his last day here in Paris greeting U.S. Embassy staff. He's on his way right now to go lay a wreath at a World War I memorial, all while warning that he thinks another big war in this part of Europe could be possible if the West stops sending 9-figure munitions packages to Ukraine.
You know, Putin's not going to stop at Ukraine. It's not just Ukraine. It's about much more than Ukraine. All of Europe will be threatened. We're not going to let that happen.
Later this week, the G7, where Western allies will work not just to help Ukraine, but also figure out how to counter China economically. President Biden claimed during a coffee with Emmanuel Macron that he's been getting complaints lately from Xi. This clip is going to be subtitled because the president was speaking so softly.
My last discussion with Xi, he said to me, why are you talking about
President Biden has not acknowledged the large pro-Palestine protest at the White House Saturday that wrapped all the way around campus. Instead, he's keeping all the talk about the war in Gaza focused on the rescued hostages.
I want to echo President Macron's comments welcoming the safe rescue of 4 hostages that were returned to their families in Israel. We won't stop working until all the hostages come home and a ceasefire is reached. That is essential to happen.
Before attending this week's G7 in Italy, which is a very short flight from here, President Biden is actually going to fly home to Delaware for a couple days, which means he will be home if there is a verdict in his son's trial by midweek. Shannon?
All right, we'll talk much more about that later in the show. Peter Doocy, thank you very much from Paris. Let's go now to Trey Yingst in Tel Aviv, Israel, where people are celebrating the return of those 4 rescued hostages. Hello, Trey.
Hey, Shannon, good morning. Almost 250 days into the war, the Israeli people received a rare piece of good news amid the conflict.
26-year-old Noah Argamani climbs into an Israeli helicopter. After 246 days in Hamas captivity, she's heading home.
Israeli Special Forces conducted complex hostage rescue mission and successfully rescued 4 of our hostages from Hamas captivity in Gaza.
The daring rescue operation taking place in central Gaza at 2 locations. Israeli forces engaged in firefights with Hamas gunmen before securing the hostages. As helicopters arrived at an Israeli hospital, crowds cheered. 4 Israelis, after more than 8 months in Gaza, were reunited with their loved ones. A father with his daughter, a man with his friends, a mother with her son.
Thank you for bringing my son to me, to us. I'm so excited that I could hug him today.
The story of light does not come without dark. During the operation, one Israeli officer named Arnon Zamora succumbed to his wounds sustained during the battle. And according to the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry, over 200 people, the majority civilians, were killed during the operation that included extensive Israeli airstrikes. They did not send us warnings or leaflets, nothing. Abdul Darwish explains, body parts spread in the streets.
The rescue operation illustrated the contradictions of war. For Palestinians, it was a day of death and destruction. For the Israeli people, exactly 35 weeks after Black Saturday, it was a day of hope. Shannon?
Trey Yingst live in Israel for us. Thank you, Trey. Joining us now, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton.
And I'll show a bad cross-examination of Senator Tom Cotton from Shannon Bream a little bit later. And I kind of pre-criticized that, although I noticed Peter Doocy, when talking about how Biden was going back to Delaware, he stuck a mention of the Hunter Biden trial in Delaware into his news summary. And Peter Doocy, actually, I was surprised he called the protest at the White House a pro-Palestine protest. Is usually anti-Israel, but I noticed the chyron, the title at the bottom of the screen from Fox News, did call it an anti-Israel protest. So just a little Peter Doocy mistake, I guess, or I don't know. And then Trey Yingst, in his report from Israel, spent so much more time on the Israeli perspective, did put in the reporting from the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza of over 200, well, it's actually almost 300 people who were killed, and did give that one Palestinian victim a little bit of airtime on Fox News, which is more than you usually see, so I guess kudos for that, but not really. And those are the two long news summaries. Now there are two short ones. The next one is CNN State of the Union, just a minute long, covering the Israeli hostage rescue in just under a minute, or exactly a minute, I think, over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is looking overseas. After 8 long months, 4 Israeli hostages are back home safely. Family reunions and tears of joy after they were rescued from Hamas captivity by IDF forces in a special operation Saturday morning. The raid of 2 separate apartments in a central Gaza refugee camp took months of preparation, the military spokesman said, since Hamas moves hostages frequently and embeds them in areas packed with civilians like this refugee camp. Following reports of heavy shelling and artillery fire, Gaza hospitals said more than 200 people were killed in the operation. CNN has not been able to verify claims about the exact number of civilian deaths in what was the first successful hostage rescue since February. Here with me now from Paris, where he is traveling with President Biden, is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
And I already showed you a clip of the Jake Sullivan interview, and that was a fair and balanced report in a minute of the hostage rescue and the reported civilian casualties. The next news summary is the shortest one. Margaret Brennan tries to fit in the hostage rescue, the Biden trip to France, the upcoming G7 summit, all in 42 seconds over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. President Biden will be returning from his visit to France today, and it'll be a quick turnaround as he'll return to Italy for a Group of 7 meeting with America's top allies later this week. At the top of the agenda for both trips, the 2 ongoing wars in Gaza and Ukraine, as well as how to handle aggression from the countries not represented at that meeting, Russia and China. We spoke with President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan earlier today and began by asking him about the Israeli hostage rescue and whether military operations are the way to free the remaining that are still held captive.
And you see CBS News Face the Nation is the only one of the 4 news summaries didn't actually mention the casualties, just the rescue along with, but it was only 42 seconds, and it's not like they don't mention it later in the program. But now I'm going to finish up with the last 3 clips of newsmakers, since I already showed you the 4th one, the Jake Sullivan clip at the beginning. And the first one I want to show you, I think, is the best cross-examination, although actually Margaret Brennan does a pretty good job of cross-examining Lindsey Graham in the clip I'm going to show you at the end. In the middle, I will show you really bad cross-examination from Shannon Bream on Fox News of Senator Tom Cotton. But first, this is the IDF spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, and Martha Raddatz really gets into the details, showing her understanding of military tactics and their effect on civilian casualties, asking Peter Lerner about bombing in broad daylight with Palestinians on the street, and whether the hundreds of casualties during the rescue, if that's something that they would do again. And I will talk about that a little more after we watch that good questioning from ABC yesterday over here.
And Colonel, part of this mission were the airstrikes. We saw buildings destroyed in a civilian area in broad daylight. There were people on the street during this attack through the air. Did you factor in the loss of so many Palestinians in this operation?
So we don't know how many casualties were caused in the strike in the release and rescue operation. And I'd be very cautious at accepting any figures and numbers that Hamas are putting out.
But even the Israelis, Hamas is putting out 274, but even the Israelis, another spokesman from the IDF said there were fewer than 100. That's a significant amount of casualties. Did they come from those airstrikes in broad daylight?
Martha, every civilian life lost in this war is a tragedy. Every civilian life lost in this war as a result of how Hamas has operated. Let's think about, just for a moment, where they were holding the hostages. Within civilian houses, within people's apartments. In the same apartment they were being held were the families that own the apartments. This exemplifies specifically how Hamas are operating. And indeed, when we extracted and snatched the hostages, Noah Argamani, Almog Meir, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Ziv, when we extracted them out, the forces came under extensive attack in an attempt to kill both them and the hostages.
And is that the reason for the airstrikes? Tell me why those airstrikes were necessary, why buildings were destroyed in that attack.
The forces came under fire from a 360-degree threat. RPGs, AK-47s, explosive devices on the way, mortar rounds. It was and is a war zone. And so civilians in that is the tragedy of civilians being caught up in this is precisely because of how Hamas is battling us on the battleground. Our responsibility, our first and foremost responsibility, is to rescue the hostages, to bring them home, to create a better security situation for Israelis, and I would say for Palestinians alike. Hamas have to go. Hamas can't be trusted with the powers of government because that is what they will do. They will build a terrorist army. They will infiltrate into Israel and abduct partygoers from the Nova Party and hold them hostage in places like Nusirat, in apartment buildings.
Again, Colonel, we are all grateful the hostages are safe, but just one final question. Would you carry out a similar rescue mission to get the other 116 hostages, no matter the cost to civilians in Gaza?
There can be arrests like what happened yesterday, but there could also be negotiations that create the opportunity. Our role is to create the conditions either way, that Hamas realize that they should give back the hostages, they should set the hostages free. We would not have to be at war at all with Hamas. And the war can be over today if Hamas lets the hostages free. Is that too much to ask?
We appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
So those were some good questions. I mean, you saw on the screen there, it said 116 hostages still held at like 200 civilian casualties, or mostly civilian casualties per hostage. Does that mean they're willing to kill like 22,000 people or whatever in order to get those 116 hostages? That can't be right, but I guess they've killed almost 40,000 Palestinians during the entire conflict, and supposedly at least 2/3 of those are civilians, depending on whose numbers you believe. And like I said earlier, it's hard to get accurate information, but at least Martha Raddatz there, I think, is asking the right questions. And I don't know what you think about the IDF spokesperson Peter Lerner's answers, or if they were acceptable. He didn't really give a number there as to what was acceptable, but it seems like it should be lower than 50 plus people per hostage, or that's my opinion. But now I'm going to show you a bad cross-examination from Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday, asking Senator Tom Cotton about a comment that President Biden made, whether Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging the conflict for his own political self-preservation, which he pretty clearly is. In fact, Benny Gantz, just another member of the Israeli Knesset, just left the war cabinet because one of the reasons he stated was because he thought Benjamin Netanyahu was prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. And yet you see here that Shannon Bream spins the question into saying that the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel is using the war for his political benefit, that's an attack on Israel, not an attack on Benjamin Netanyahu. And Senator Tom Cotton certainly doesn't correct that, and he goes into this whole argument that is based at the end on a falsehood that Shannon Bream backs up, as I will talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
In the meantime, the president gave an interview to Time magazine a few days ago, and he was asked this. Some in Israel have suggested that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? President Biden responded, I'm not going to comment on that, but then added this. There's every reason for people to draw that conclusion. What do you make of that response from him about our ally in the region? And what do you say to critics who say that is exactly what Netanyahu's doing?
Well, this is just another slander by Joe Biden against Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government at large. Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies are very popular. There is a war cabinet that is signing off on missions like you saw yesterday. At every turn, Joe Biden has tried to limit Israel's freedom of action, their ability to defend themselves, and to put more pressure on Israel, not pressure on Hamas and its patrons in the Middle East. Just look at what happened yesterday outside the White House. You had anti-American, pro-Hamas lunatics defacing and desecrating the statues of our great veterans, which is a plain violation of federal law. But Joe Biden's government allowed it to happen, and I bet we're not going to see any arrests or prosecutions for violating that law. I'll introduce legislation this week that imposes stiffer penalties so we can lock these lunatics up. But Joe Biden thinks that these pro-Hamas, anti-American lunatics should be guiding American policy towards Israel. What we should be doing is backing Israel to the hilt, and if we had done that since the October 7th attacks, this war would probably already be over, hostages would be freed, and there'd be less civilian casualties and suffering in Gaza. But Joe Biden is instead catering to the small pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party instead of backing Israel like the large pro-Israel majority of the American people want us to.
Yeah, that's what the polling shows. Let's talk about another hotspot, Ukraine.
That's what the polling shows? Based on what? Where does Shannon Bream come up with that support for Senator Tom Cotton, that the vast majority of the American people support backing Israel to the hilt with no conditions? In fact, if you want to see how to cross-examine a Republican on the actual facts, here's Margaret Brennan on CBS using a poll that shows the exact opposite. But of course, Lindsey Graham doesn't care about what the American people want. He wants to do what Senator Tom Cotton just said. And that's the final newsmaker clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we juxtapose it to that last really bad piece of journalism over here.
Sir, you just mentioned U.S. military aid. Our poll out today shows a majority of Americans, 61%, say the U.S. should not send Israel weapons. 6 in 10 says Israel should stop or decrease its military actions in Gaza. Isn't it time for this war to end now, given that the tide of public opinion is turning against Israel?
I think it'd be the biggest mistake we could. I criticize Senator Tuberville for his view of Ukraine. Let me be straight with you. Hamas would kill everybody here if they could get here. Israel's not our enemy. They're our ally. Well, they can't because they're pinned down over there. I want them destroyed so they can never come back to hurt Israel or us. Hezbollah is alive and well. So to those Americans who believe pulling the plug on Israel now makes us safer, you've missed a lot. Radical Islam wants to slit the throat of every Jewish person and your throat too. So no, I want to give weapons they need. The administration's withholding weapons. Trump was a great ally of Israel. If he wins this election, he'll have another great ally. I appreciate what President Biden's doing, but it's all been so slow. So if you don't, Iran, here's the big takeaway from my trip. The IDF chief told me he's never been more worried about a nuclear breakout regarding the Iranians than he is right now. He thinks we've lost deterrence. He's asking for joint military operations with the United States to convince Iran not to dash toward a nuclear weapon. These are the most dangerous times since the 30s. Don't make the mistakes of the 30s. Senator Tuberville said, give Putin what he wants. Yeah. Well, that's what we did in the 30s. That didn't work out. Pull the plug onto Israel. That didn't work in World War II. It's not going to work now.
Very quickly, before I let you go, in this past year, the Biden administration deported, expelled, or repatriated more than 740,000 people, which they say is more than any year since 2010.
And I just kept that playing because that was like another really good question from Margaret Brennan with confronting a Republican with facts about immigration. But if you want to see the rest of that down in the video description under sources, I put links to the sources of all the clips, including the Face the Nation link, which goes to the Face the Nation channel on YouTube, where the entire episode is uploaded for free, so you can see how Senator Lindsey Graham responds there. My one bit quibble that Margaret Brennan did not follow up on one argument that Lindsey Graham made at the end of that clip, where you pulling the plug on Israel during World War II didn't work. Well, Israel didn't exist during World War II. I have no idea what that one part of his argument was supposed to mean. I don't know. I need some sort of like Republican to reality translator to figure that one out, so I don't get it. But anyway, that was the last Newsmaker clip. It's a short show today because of we're missing Meet the Press, and I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into picking out the clips and adding my media criticism and political commentary. I'm sorry if maybe I'm a little bit off today. This is, now in June 2024 was the first time I finally got one of these positive COVID tests. So it's been a little bit of a tough week. I think I might have actually been a little sick during last Monday's show. And because that positive test is actually from last Tuesday, and it's been a little bit of a experience. The definite symptoms. I'm still kind of tired, so I apologize if I'm not up to my best form for the show, but I make a commitment to do the show every Monday, and I do it, and I'm going to keep doing it all the way through January 2025. And I had problems getting a good clip of my cats Cheech and Chong. At least you got to see Cheech live at the beginning, but like right before the show out in the hallway, I kind of got them both to come up to the camera in the brief Cheech and Chong the kitten bonus clip that I will end the show with before I say goodbye over here. So there you go. That was the best I could do this week. Hopefully I'll have a more exciting, active Cheech and Chong the kitten clip to end the show with next Monday. And I will be back next Monday and every Monday through the inauguration, January 2025. As I've said many times, I've committed to keeping doing the show every Monday all the way until we find out whether the person inaugurated in January is the same person who won in November. And honestly, I don't know. I don't know. So that's why I'm sticking with it till then. I may have some other reason to upload a video in the next week. If not, I'll just see you next Monday, hopefully with a better Cheech and Chong clip to show you at the end, and I guess until then, I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.